I had always thought my life was ordinary, predictable even. A job I didn't mind, a house I was proud of, and a wife I loved deeply. Emily and I had been together for 10 years. Our relationship, while not perfect, seemed to be the definition of stability. We'd built a life together, formed routines, and grown accustomed to each other's quirks. We were comfortable, content. But I never could have imagined that a single moment would change everything. I never expected anything to disrupt the quiet order of our life. It was an ordinary Saturday, just like any other. The sun was shining, the weather was mild, and I had decided to take on a long overdue chore, cleaning out the closet. Emily was at the grocery store, so I had the house to myself. It was a task I wasn't particularly fond of, but it seemed like a productive way to spend the afternoon. I hadn't planned on finding anything unexpected that day. I had no reason to suspect that my world would soon shatter. As I moved through the clutter in the closet, shifting through old books and forgotten knickknacks, something caught my eye. A small, leather-bound notebook. It was tucked away between two textbooks on the shelf, nothing special, at least not at first glance. But there was something about it that felt oddly familiar. It was hers. I recognized the faint scent of her perfume lingering on the cover, the delicate stitching along the edges. I didn't mean to open it. It wasn't like me to invade her privacy. But curiosity crept in, and before I could stop myself, I flipped it open. What I read inside would haunt me for the rest of my life. At first, I skimmed through the pages. The handwriting was neat, familiar, Emily's usual careful script. I saw entries about our life, small moments of our routine, and observations about the people around us. There was nothing that stood out, nothing that hinted at the darkness lurking beneath the surface. But then, as I turned the page, I saw something that stopped me in my tracks. I can't stop thinking about him. It feels wrong, but it's also thrilling. I'm afraid to tell myself the truth. What if this ruins everything? My heart raced as I reread the sentence, unsure of whether I had understood it correctly. The words echoed in my mind, leaving me breathless. Him. I could feel my palms growing clammy, my mind struggling to process what I had just read. I forced myself to take a deep breath, to steady my shaking hands. I told myself that maybe I had misunderstood, that it was just some random, fleeting thought. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized that the doubt in my chest wasn't going away. No, these weren't just passing words. This was something real. Something serious. My pulse quickened and I turned the page, desperate for answers. The next entry only deepened my confusion and fear. He's so different from you, and yet I feel this pull I can't explain. I never thought I'd be the kind of person to do this, but I can't deny what's happening. I felt a lump form in my throat. My thoughts were clouded with questions. Who was she talking about? What was going on? I had to know more, even if it meant unraveling a truth I wasn't ready to face. But in that moment, I knew I had crossed a line. I wasn't just reading about her thoughts. I was starting to glimpse something darker, something that felt like a betrayal. I couldn't stop reading. I had to understand. As I continued reading, the entries became more detailed, more personal. My hands were trembling, and I could barely focus on the words as I turned each page, each one pulling me deeper into a world I didn't recognize. It became clear that Emily wasn't just having fleeting thoughts about another man. She was in love with him. She had been seeing him for months. The entries were filled with descriptions of stolen moments, secret meetings, and the rush she felt in his presence. There was a kind of excitement in her words, an energy I hadn't seen in her in years. I can't believe how alive I feel when I'm with him. It's like I'm finally able to breathe. But I don't know how much longer I can keep this a secret. I'm terrified of losing everything, of losing you. I felt the floor drop from beneath me. My mind raced to comprehend what I was reading. How had I not seen this? How had I missed the signs? I thought I knew Emily better than anyone, but now it felt like she was a stranger, a woman I didn't understand at all. The betrayal didn't just sting, it cut deep into my core. I read her words, felt her guilt, her fear of being caught, but the deeper I went, the more I realized something I hadn't expected. There was no remorse in her writing. No regret, not at first. There was only the thrill of being desired, the intoxicating pull of something new. I don't want to hurt you. I really don't. But I don't know how to stop. I'm falling for him and I don't know if I can turn back now. Every line hit like a blow to the chest. I thought about all the moments we had shared, our vacations, our quiet nights at home, our plans for the future, and now they all felt like lies. I had been living a life that wasn't real, with a woman who had been hiding a piece of herself from me. I felt lost, adrift in a sea of emotions. Anger. Confusion. Betrayal. But most of all, I felt the sting of being replaced. Emily had found something or someone more exciting than me. Something I hadn't even known was missing. As I read on, I began to realize that I wasn't just reading about an affair. I was reading about a transformation, a shift in the woman I thought I knew. And the worst part was I couldn't stop reading. Each new entry pulled me deeper into the truth, into the world of secrets she had been keeping from me. I wanted to close the journal, to throw it away, to pretend I hadn't seen anything. But I couldn't. I was gripped by a need to understand, even if the understanding came at the cost of my heart. The journal didn't just tell me about the affair. It revealed everything Emily had been feeling, the push and pull between her guilt and the undeniable connection she felt with this other man. I've never felt this way before. It's scary, but it's also so exciting. He makes me feel seen in a way that you don't. I can't explain it, but I don't want it to end. Each entry made my stomach twist. There was no mention of trying to fix things with me, no desire to come clean, or a thought about how to repair our relationship. It was all about him, about the way he made her feel, about the new energy he had injected into her life. I kept reading, unable to stop myself, even though every word felt like a fresh wound. I feel terrible. I don't know what to do. Every time I'm with him, I can't help but think about you. But then he kisses me and it feels like everything else disappears. I can't help it. I don't want to hurt you, but I'm scared of losing him. It was as if my world had been completely inverted. The woman I had spent years with, the woman I trusted and loved, was confiding in a journal about her love for someone else. She was torn between her husband and her lover, and yet there was no clear path forward. She loved both in different ways and didn't seem to know how to reconcile them. I could feel the fury building inside me, a quiet storm of emotions I had been trying to hold back. But beneath the anger was a hollow ache, a deep sense of being displaced in my own life. How could she do this to us? To me? The entries didn't just document the affair. They were filled with her confusion, her fear of the consequences, and her longing for the new relationship. There was no mention of love for me. No expression of regret. It was all about what she felt for him, and what that love was making her question about the life we had built. I hate that I'm hurting you, but it's like I can't stop myself. He makes me feel alive in a way you haven't in a long time. With every word it became clearer. I wasn't just another chapter in her life, I was the life she was ready to walk away from. I wasn't the man she longed for anymore. The man who had stood beside her through thick and thin was no longer the one who excited her. That man was someone else. The truth sat heavy in my chest, suffocating me. As I read further, I realized that Emily had made up her mind. She had already chosen him, and I was just the one left behind, clinging to the remnants of a life that was no longer mine. After what felt like hours of reading, I finally put the journal down. My head was spinning, my heart was in a state of turmoil. The silence in the room felt deafening. I couldn't think clearly. Every word, every sentence had carved deeper into me. The weight of her betrayal hung in the air like a thick fog, and I couldn't escape it. I wanted to confront her immediately, to demand the truth, but part of me knew I wasn't ready. I wasn't sure what I would even say, how I could look her in the eye after everything I had just learned. I needed time to process, to gather my thoughts. But in the pit of my stomach I felt something else. I knew she was going to confess. She had to. There was no way she could keep this hidden for much longer. The truth had already found its way into my hands, and now it was only a matter of time before she came to me with it. I couldn't escape the nagging feeling that the moment was coming, and when it did, everything would change forever. The next few days were a blur. Emily acted normal, perhaps even a little too normal. She didn't seem aware that I knew, that I had uncovered her secret. But I couldn't stop myself from noticing the little things. The way she seemed distant at times, her nervous glances when our eyes met, the way her hand lingered over her phone, hiding it from view whenever I was nearby. It wasn't until a week later after dinner one night that I saw it in her eyes. There was no denying it anymore. The guilt was all over her face, her expression tight with the weight of something she had been hiding. "I need to talk to you," she said, her voice unsteady. I nodded, though I wasn't sure I was ready for what was about to unfold. My heart pounded in my chest as I silently braced myself. The moment I had been dreading, yet almost expecting, was finally here. She sat down across from me, her eyes welling with tears, her hands wringing together in her lap. She opened her mouth, then closed it, as though the words were caught in her throat. It seemed like she was struggling to find the right thing to say. She began, then stopped, taking a shaky breath. "I need to tell you something. I've been seeing someone else." The words hit me like a slap. She didn't even try to sugarcoat it. There was no explanation, no apology, just the brutal truth laid bare before me. I had known it was coming, but hearing it out loud felt like a different kind of pain. It was real now. "I never meant for it to happen," she continued, her voice breaking. "It just happened and I didn't know how to stop it. I'm so sorry." I wanted to scream, to demand every detail of what had been going on, but I stayed silent. I had already seen it all, read every word in her journal. There was nothing more she could say that would shock me. "Who is he?" I asked quietly, though I wasn't sure I wanted to know. She hesitated, her eyes darting to the floor. "His name is Mark." The name meant nothing to me. It wasn't a name I recognized from our circle of friends or anyone she had mentioned before. I realized then that Mark was someone I would never know, someone I would never be able to confront. But it didn't matter. What mattered was the fact that she had chosen him, that the life we had built together was now just a memory, something I was going to have to let go of. I looked at her, really looked at her, and for the first time I didn't see my wife. I saw a woman who had made a choice, a woman who had stepped away from everything we had worked for. And in that moment, I knew I couldn't go back. "I know," I said quietly. Her eyes widened in shock. "What do you mean you know?" I couldn't bring myself to tell her about the journal, about how I had discovered her secret long before she had the courage to admit it. Instead, I just shook my head, a hollow smile crossing my lips. "I know," I repeated, my voice more certain now. "I know everything." The silence between us was thick with unspoken words. The truth was out now and there was no taking it back. There was no undoing the damage. The words hung in the air between us, heavy and suffocating. Emily's eyes filled with tears, but I couldn't bring myself to comfort her. I couldn't pretend that everything was fine when it wasn't. The truth had already shattered everything we had. She sat there, trembling, her hands still tightly clasped in her lap. "I never wanted to hurt you," she whispered, her voice raw. "I don't know how it happened. I didn't mean for it to go this far. I'm so sorry. I should have said something, anything, but I was frozen." The weight of the betrayal had completely paralyzed me. She had already apologized, but I knew that no apology would ever be enough. I had read her journal. I knew that this wasn't just a mistake. This wasn't something she could take back. I thought of all the years we'd spent together, the laughter, the shared dreams, the quiet moments when we had built our life. It all seemed so fragile now. How had I not seen the cracks? How had I missed the signs? I don't know what to say," she continued, her voice trembling. "I never wanted this to come between us, but I can't pretend anymore. I've been so lost. I don't know what to do. I love you, but I love him too, and I don't know how to make it right." Her confession sent another wave of hurt crashing over me. I couldn't process it. Love. She loved me, but she also loved him? I felt like I was suffocating, drowning in the reality that I was no longer enough for her. That I had been replaced by someone else. "I can't do this," I finally said, my voice thick with emotion. I wasn't sure if I was speaking to her or to myself. "I can't compete with him, and I can't keep living this lie." The words were like a final act of clarity. I wasn't angry, not in the way I thought I would be. I wasn't yelling or accusing her. But I knew deep down that I couldn't keep pretending that things could go back to the way they were. I couldn't live in the shadow of someone else's presence in our marriage. Her eyes widened in shock as she heard my words. What are you saying? I stood up slowly, my legs feeling heavy. I needed space, needed to breathe. I couldn't stay in that room for another minute, not with the weight of her confession hanging over me. I turned away, walking toward the door, but before I could leave, I looked back one last time. I think we need to be apart, I said softly. I think I need to be apart from you. And with that, I walked out. I didn't know where I was going, only that I couldn't stay there, in that house where everything had been turned upside down. I drove aimlessly, not caring about the direction. I needed to escape, to clear my head, to figure out what came next. The pain was unbearable. But as I drove, a strange clarity began to form in the depths of my mind. Emily had made her choice. She had fallen in love with someone else, and there was nothing I could do to change that. The life we had shared was gone. I wasn't sure what the future held, but I knew that I couldn't stay in a place that felt like a constant reminder of what had been lost. The road stretched before me, endless and open. And for the first time in days, I felt like I was moving forward. Even if I didn't know where I was going, I was at least moving away from the life I had known, the life that had crumbled under the weight of betrayal. When I returned home hours later, the house felt foreign. It wasn't the same place I had left that morning. The walls, the furniture, even the air seemed different, as though it had absorbed the tension, the hurt, the sorrow. Everything felt hollow, like a shell of what it once was. Emily was gone. Her things were still scattered around, her shoes by the door, her jacket on the couch, but she was nowhere to be found. It was as though she had vanished, leaving behind nothing but the remnants of a life we had shared. I walked through the house in a daze, moving from room to room, touching things absently, not sure what to do with myself. I had never imagined that our life would unravel so completely, so suddenly. The reality of the situation was still settling in, and I couldn't quite grasp it. The living room, once warm and filled with our laughter, now felt like a museum of memories. The photographs on the walls, the little trinkets we had picked up from trips, the books we had read together, all of it was a reminder of the life I had lost. The life I thought I was still living until today. I sat down on the couch, staring at the space where we had spent so many nights watching movies, talking about our day, planning our future. Now it felt like a tomb and I couldn't escape it. For a moment I felt a rush of anger, a desperate urge to throw everything out, to erase all the evidence of the past. But as quickly as the anger came, it ebbed away, leaving only an overwhelming sadness. The truth had set in and it wasn't something I could change. Emily had made her choice and I had to live with it. I glanced at my phone. There were no messages from her, no calls. She hadn't tried to reach out. I wondered if she was already with him. If Mark was waiting for her, offering her the comfort and excitement I no longer could. I hated myself for thinking it, but I couldn't stop the thought from invading my mind. But no matter what I imagined, the fact remained: our marriage was over. The life we had built was nothing but ashes now. I stood up and walked to the bedroom. It felt like the last place I should be, the place where so many of our most intimate memories had been made. But as I opened the door, I stopped in my tracks. On the bed I saw the journal. The one I had found all those days ago. It was sitting there as if it had been waiting for me. The journal that had led me to this moment, the moment when I had learned the truth. I didn't want to look at it again. I didn't want to revisit the words that had already cut me open. But there it was, calling me, almost as if it had more to say. A part of me wanted to throw it away, to burn it and forget it ever existed. But another part of me, maybe the part still clinging to some semblance of the past, felt like I needed to understand everything. I needed to know why. With trembling hands, I picked it up. I opened to the last page I had read, the one where Emily had confessed everything. And then I read on. The next entry was a confession, one that would change everything again. I've made up my mind. I can't live this lie anymore. I've told him that I'm going to leave. I don't know what's going to happen next, but I can't keep pretending. I love him, and I can't stay in a marriage that isn't real. I know it's selfish and I know it will hurt you, but I don't know how to fix what's broken. I can't do it anymore. Her words were like a dagger to my chest. She was leaving. Not for a weekend, not for a temporary break. She was leaving me, and I didn't even know how to respond. There were no more second chances, no more attempts to salvage what little we had left. The decision had been made. And yet, as I sat there reading those words, I couldn't help but wonder if, deep down, she had already made her peace with it. If she had already let go of me, of us, long before she had written those words. I closed the journal with a quiet, resigned sigh. The house felt even emptier now, even colder. I wasn't sure what to do next. The future seemed like a vast, empty space, and I had no idea where to begin. But I knew one thing. I couldn't stay here in this house, surrounded by memories that were too painful to keep. It was time for me to leave too. Time to find my own way forward, even if I had no idea what that would look like. As I stood up and began to gather a few things, I made a promise to myself. I wasn't going to let her affair define me. I wasn't going to let it be the end of me. It was painful, it was unfair, but I would find a way to move on. The road ahead was uncertain, but I couldn't stay in the past forever. And maybe, just maybe, there was something better waiting for me out there. The days that followed were a blur of action and emotion. I moved out of the house, though the process felt surreal. Packing up my life, packing up the remnants of a marriage that had seemed so unshakable, was harder than I had imagined. Each item I packed away felt like a weight on my shoulders, a reminder of everything I had lost. I stayed with a friend for a while, a place that was far enough from the place I had called home, but still close enough to keep me tethered to the reality I was struggling to accept. It was a small, quiet apartment, and I didn't mind the solitude. I needed the space to think, to try to process the overwhelming whirlwind that had become my life. Emily didn't reach out. Not once. I expected her to call or text, to apologize again, to somehow try to explain herself further. But that never came. I don't know what I was hoping for, some sort of closure, perhaps, some gesture that might reassure me that the person I had known still existed underneath the hurt. But that didn't happen. And as the days turned into weeks, I began to realize that Emily had already moved on. The man she had chosen was the one she was building a future with. And I was just a part of her past. It was difficult to accept. The sting of betrayal still cut deep, but a strange kind of numbness began to settle in. I didn't feel anger anymore, not the kind that had consumed me in the early days. Instead, there was just a deep, aching sadness, a quiet longing for what could have been. I tried to keep busy, throwing myself into work, meeting with friends when I could, and doing whatever I could to keep my mind occupied. But when the silence crept in, it was hard to avoid the truth. My life had been torn apart in a way I hadn't imagined. Emily's affair had shattered not just our marriage, but my identity. I had to learn who I was again, without her by my side. One night I decided to go for a walk. The city was quiet, and the cold air felt good against my skin. It was a strange kind of comfort, the emptiness of the streets mirroring the emptiness I felt inside. I needed time to think, to figure out where to go from here. As I walked, I realized something that at first seemed impossible to accept. I wasn't the man I had been before. I had changed. In the wake of Emily's betrayal, I had been forced to grow, to confront parts of myself I had long ignored. The pain was still there, but I knew I couldn't stay in it forever. I had to start rebuilding, even if I didn't know how. That night, I returned to my temporary apartment with a strange sense of determination. I had no idea what the future held, but I knew I couldn't keep clinging to the past. I had to let go. I had to find a way to live again, without looking back at the life that no longer existed. I started small. I began going to the gym more often, finding solace in the routine of physical exertion. I started taking long walks, clearing my head, finding peace in the quiet moments. Slowly, I reconnected with old friends, people I hadn't seen in years. It wasn't much, but it was something. The hardest part, though, was facing myself in the mirror. It wasn't just about moving on from Emily, it was about learning to be okay with who I was now. I had to rebuild my own identity from the ground up. I had to find a way to love myself again, despite the pain. The truth was, I wasn't sure I would ever be the same person I had been before. And maybe that wasn't a bad thing. Maybe this was an opportunity to start fresh, to build something new. It was terrifying, but it was also liberating. For the first time in a long while, I allowed myself to imagine a future that didn't involve Emily. A future that was mine and mine alone. It wasn't easy, and it certainly wasn't quick. There were days when the pain would hit me all over again, moments when I would find myself yearning for the life I had lost. But as time passed, the ache started to dull. Slowly, I began to realize that I was stronger than I had thought. I could survive this. And maybe, just maybe, I could thrive. Several months passed and I found myself settling into a routine. Work was demanding, but it kept me occupied. I had stopped expecting things to return to the way they were, and I had even stopped thinking about Emily as much. The wound was still there, but it wasn't as raw anymore. I was learning to live with it, learning to be at peace with the fact that my life had taken an unexpected turn. One evening, I decided to attend a work event. It wasn't the kind of thing I would have normally enjoyed, but I knew it was a good opportunity to network and put myself out there again. I was starting to embrace the idea of change, even if I wasn't entirely comfortable with it yet. I walked into the crowded ballroom, the sound of chatter and clinking glasses filling the air. As I made my way to the bar, I noticed a woman standing alone near the edge of the room. Her back was turned, but there was something familiar about the way she stood, something that made my heart skip a beat. It took me a moment to process, but then it hit me. It was Claire, a former colleague of mine. We hadn't spoken in years. She had moved to another city for work shortly after I had started dating Emily, and I had lost touch with her. But I remembered her vividly, her quick smile, the way she always seemed to know how to make people laugh. Without thinking, I walked over to her. "Claire," I said, my voice tentative, as if I wasn't sure she would remember me. She turned, and her eyes lit up with recognition. "Oh my God, is that really you?" she exclaimed, a wide smile spreading across her face. "It's been forever." We exchanged pleasantries, and before I knew it, we were deep in conversation, catching up on everything from work to life. It was easy, comfortable. There was a warmth between us, a natural ease that I hadn't felt in a long time. It was almost as if I could breathe a little easier just talking to her. As the night wore on, we found ourselves standing in a quieter corner of the room, away from the noise of the crowd. Claire was telling me about her travels and the projects she had been working on, and I was listening intently, enjoying the sound of her voice. There was something about her that made me feel alive again, something that made me forget, even if only for a moment, the pain of the past. I found myself opening up to her in a way I hadn't with anyone else in a long time. I talked about Emily, about the affair, about the months of struggle that had followed. I hadn't realized how much I had needed to say all of it out loud until I found myself sharing it with Claire. She listened without judgment, her expression compassionate but not pitying. When I finished, there was a long pause. Claire reached out and placed a hand on my arm, her touch warm and comforting. "I'm so sorry you went through that," she said softly. "But you're stronger than you think. It's clear that you've been through a lot, but it's also clear that you're moving forward. And that's really something." Her words hit me harder than I expected. For the first time in months, I felt seen, not as a man who had been betrayed, but as someone who was trying to rebuild, to move forward. As the evening drew to a close, we exchanged contact information. Claire invited me to grab coffee sometime, and I agreed, feeling a strange sense of hope that I hadn't felt in a long time. Leaving the event that night, I couldn't help but think about what had just happened. It had been so long since I'd connected with someone in such a genuine way. Claire hadn't been part of my past, but I could see the possibility of something new, something untainted by the memories of Emily. I wasn't ready to jump into anything, and I wasn't sure I was even ready to date again. But something about Claire, something about the way she had listened and the way she made me feel, left me with a glimmer of hope. Maybe, just maybe, there was still something to look forward to in the future. And for the first time in a long while, I found myself willing to consider it. A future. A life that wasn't defined by Emily's betrayal, but by the possibility of something new. It was a small step, but it was a step forward, and that was enough for now. As the days passed, I couldn't stop thinking about Claire. Her words, her kindness, her easy laughter, it all stayed with me, lingering in the back of my mind. I wasn't sure what I was looking for, or if I was even ready to open myself up to someone new, but there was something about her that felt different. It wasn't the rush of infatuation, but a steady, comfortable feeling that slowly began to build each time we spoke. We met for coffee the following week, and the conversation flowed effortlessly. There were no heavy topics, no expectations, just two people getting to know each other again after years of being apart. We talked about everything and nothing: work, hobbies, travel, even our favorite books and movies. It was light, easy, and strangely refreshing. Still, I couldn't help but wonder, was I ready for this? Could I really move on from my past, from Emily, and give someone else a chance? Part of me wanted to hold on to the familiar, the memories, even the pain. I wasn't sure I was ready to let it all go. But as the weeks went on, Claire's presence in my life became a welcome distraction, a gentle nudge away from the past. She never pushed me to talk about things I wasn't ready to confront. Instead, she gave me the space I needed, never asking for more than I could give. It was a kind of friendship, something pure, something that felt like a safe harbor. It wasn't just her that made me feel at ease. It was the way she made me see myself in a different light. Without all the weight of my failed marriage, without the scars of betrayal, I was starting to recognize parts of myself I had forgotten. I had been so consumed by the past that I hadn't noticed how much I had lost sight of who I truly was. But now, slowly, I was rediscovering pieces of myself, bits of joy, curiosity, and laughter that had been buried beneath the hurt. There were moments, though, when doubt crept in. Was I betraying Emily by even considering another woman? Was I moving on too quickly? But the more I thought about it, the clearer it became that I wasn't replacing Emily. I wasn't trying to fill a void. I was simply opening myself up to the possibility of something new, something that was mine, not tied to the pain of the past. One evening, a month or so after our first meeting, Claire invited me to dinner. It wasn't a date, she insisted, just two friends catching up. But as the night unfolded, the lines between friendship and something more started to blur. We talked for hours about life, about our dreams, about where we saw ourselves in the future. There was an intimacy between us that I hadn't expected. And for the first time in a long time, I found myself thinking about the future with someone else in it. As the evening came to a close, Claire walked me to my car. We stood there for a moment, both of us lingering in the quiet of the night. "I'm really glad we reconnected," she said softly, her eyes meeting mine. "I've missed having you around." "Me too," I replied, feeling the truth of the words settle in. "It's been good to have you back in my life." There was a pause, a moment of hesitation, before she leaned in and kissed me lightly on the cheek. It was a small gesture, innocent even, but it sent a jolt of warmth through me. It was the first time in months that I had felt something that wasn't tied to the past, something new, something real. I didn't know what would happen next. Maybe this was the start of something more, or maybe it was just a fleeting connection. But for the first time in a long while, I felt hopeful. I was finally looking forward to the future, to the possibility of healing and growth. As I drove home that night, I couldn't help but smile. Life was still unpredictable, still filled with uncertainty, but I had learned one important thing through all of this. No matter how deep the pain, no matter how many mistakes or broken dreams, the road ahead was always open. The future wasn't set in stone, it was something I could shape. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was ready to take that next step. As the weeks turned into months, I found myself slowly embracing the changes in my life. The pain of my past still lingered, but it wasn't the overwhelming force it had once been. I had learned to carry it, to acknowledge it without letting it define me. I was becoming the man I needed to be, not for anyone else but for myself. And in that quiet strength, I began to feel a sense of peace. Claire and I had continued seeing each other, not in the rushed, intense way of a new relationship, but in a way that allowed us both to grow and explore what this connection could mean. She was patient with me, understanding that I wasn't ready to rush into anything. I appreciated that about her, her ability to allow things to unfold naturally. There was no pressure, no expectation, just two people enjoying each other's company. But even as I found comfort in this new, slow-building connection, there were moments when I was haunted by the past. Memories of Emily would sneak up on me when I least expected it. An old song on the radio, a familiar street corner, a flash of an old photograph. It was in those moments that I realized how deep the scars ran. The betrayal had left a mark that I would never fully be rid of. One night, after a particularly difficult day at work, I sat alone in my apartment, staring at the walls. It had been one of those days when everything felt too heavy, too overwhelming. The weight of the past, of the life I had lost, seemed to close in on me, and I knew it was time to confront it. I couldn't keep hiding from the emotions that had been festering inside me for so long. I reached for my phone and dialed the one number I had been avoiding, Emily's. The phone rang twice before she picked up. "Hello." Her voice was hesitant, as if she didn't expect to hear from me. "Hi, Emily. It's me," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. I think we need to talk." There was a long pause before she replied, her voice soft. "I didn't think you'd ever want to talk to me again." I could hear the guilt in her voice, the weight of everything unsaid between us. But I had to do this. I needed to face the woman who had once been my partner, the woman whose actions had shattered everything I thought I knew about love and trust. "I don't know what to say, Emily," I began, the words coming out slowly. "But I need closure. I need to understand what happened. Not for you, well, maybe in part for you, but more for me. I need to know why. And I need to know if there's anything left of the person I used to love." Another long silence stretched between us. I could feel her hesitation, her uncertainty. Finally she spoke. "I never wanted to hurt you," she said quietly. "I never meant for any of this to happen. But I was lost. I don't know what I was searching for, but I know I wasn't being honest with myself or with you. And I'm sorry. I'm truly sorry for everything." Her words hit me harder than I expected. The apology was long overdue, but hearing it now, after everything that had happened, felt like a bittersweet balm on a wound that would never fully heal. I had wanted this, needed it in a way, but it didn't change the reality. Emily had made her choices, and no apology could undo the damage. "I appreciate you saying that," I replied, my voice hoarse. "But I think we both know that it's too late for us. I don't know if we could ever go back to what we were. I don't even know if we should try. But I needed to hear you say that. I needed to hear the truth, finally." There was another pause, and when she spoke again, her voice was filled with sorrow. "I understand. I never wanted to be the one who destroyed what we had, but I see now that I did. I hope, one day you can forgive me." I didn't answer right away. Forgiveness wasn't something I could just hand out, not yet. I had forgiven her in small ways over time, when I stopped letting the anger control me, when I let go of the resentment, but to say I truly forgave her, that was something else entirely. "I don't know if I can forgive you, Emily," I said honestly. "But I don't want to carry this anger with me anymore. I can't keep holding on to it. I need to let go." There was a quiet sob on the other end of the line, and for a moment I thought about everything we had been, everything we had lost. I thought about how we had once dreamed together, how we had once believed that nothing could tear us apart. But those dreams were gone now, and all that was left was the reality of our brokenness. "I'm sorry," she whispered again, and I could hear the tears in her voice. "I really am." "I know," I said quietly. "Goodbye, Emily." And with that, I ended the call. As I sat there, the weight of the conversation sinking in, I realized something important. Saying goodbye didn't mean erasing the past, it didn't mean pretending that it hadn't happened. But it did mean accepting it. It meant acknowledging that I had no control over what had come before, but that I had control over what came next. The road ahead was uncertain, but I knew one thing for sure: I wasn't going to carry the past with me forever. It was time to let go. Time to move forward. And as I thought about Claire, about the possibilities of a new life, I felt a flicker of hope. The future was still mine to shape. After hanging up with Emily, I sat still for a long time, staring at the phone in my hand. The conversation had been difficult, but it had also been necessary. I had finally heard the words I needed to hear, the apology that had been missing for so long. It wasn't going to fix everything, but it was a start. And in that quiet moment I realized something: I was ready to move on. The past no longer had a hold on me. It would always be a part of my story, but it didn't define me anymore. In the days that followed, I felt a sense of lightness I hadn't experienced in months. I wasn't carrying that burden of unanswered questions anymore. The road ahead wasn't clear, there were still a lot of uncertainties, but I knew I was finally in control. It was time to start living for myself again. Claire and I continued to see each other, but now there was something different between us. It wasn't rushed, but it felt real. We didn't need to rush to define what we were. We just enjoyed being in each other's company, letting things unfold naturally. She never pushed me, never rushed me, and that's exactly what I needed. As time passed, I realized how much she had helped me through this period of my life. Claire didn't erase the pain of the past, but she showed me that there was room for something new. She didn't replace Emily, but she reminded me that there was more to life than the hurt I had been holding onto. And in her presence I started to feel alive again, like maybe, just maybe, I could have a future after all. It wasn't easy. There were still moments of doubt, moments when I wondered if I was making the right choice. But each day felt like a small step forward. I had learned to embrace the uncertainty, to welcome the unknown. And with Claire by my side, I felt like I could face whatever came next. As I looked ahead, I didn't know what the future held. But for the first time in a long time, I felt ready to find out. The months with Claire passed slowly, but in the best way possible. We took our time, enjoying each other's company without rushing into anything. It felt easy, comfortable, and I began to rediscover parts of myself I had forgotten. One day, while walking in the park, I found myself sharing things I had never told anyone, about my childhood, my struggles, and the emotional scars I carried. Claire listened quietly, offering nothing but support. I realized that for the first time in a long time, I wasn't hiding parts of myself. "Thank you for listening," I said, grateful for her presence. I didn't realize how much I needed to say all that. She smiled, squeezing my hand. "You don't have to carry it alone." Her words meant more than she knew. I wasn't expecting her to fix me, but her kindness was healing in its own way. Still, doubts would creep in. Was I ready to open my heart again? But each day with Claire reminded me that healing wasn't about rushing. It was about trusting myself again and letting go of the past, one small step at a time. One evening, as we sat watching the sunset, I realized how much had changed. I was no longer consumed by the pain of the past. I was learning to live again. "I'm glad I met you," I said, my voice soft but sure. Claire looked at me with warmth in her eyes. "I'm glad too. Whatever happens, I'm here." And in that moment I knew, I wasn't alone anymore. The future was still uncertain, but I wasn't afraid. I had learned to embrace the unknown, and with Claire by my side, I was ready for whatever came next. As the months continued, I began to realize something important. Healing wasn't just about letting go of the past, it was about making decisions for the future. Every day with Claire, I was faced with the question of what I truly wanted out of life. It wasn't an easy question, but it was one I had to ask myself. Claire was there, steady and understanding, never pressuring me, never demanding more than I was ready to give. But I could see it in her eyes. She wasn't just offering her companionship, she was offering a future. The warmth between us had grown, the quiet moments had become more comfortable, and even the silences felt less heavy. One evening, as we sat together in the small cafe we'd started visiting regularly, I felt that familiar pang of uncertainty. I had spent so long in the shadows of my past, I wondered if I was ready to step into the light with Claire. Was I really ready for this? I turned to her, my mind racing. "Claire," I began, my voice a little shaky. "I need to ask you something. I know this has been slow and I know I've held back. But I don't want to keep holding on to the past. I think I'm ready to try something more. With you." Her eyes softened as she listened, and I could see a mix of relief and hope in her expression. She reached across the table and took my hand, squeezing it gently. "I'm glad you're ready," she said quietly. "But I'm not going anywhere. Take your time. I'm here whenever you're ready, however long it takes." Her words were exactly what I needed to hear. It wasn't about rushing or forcing something that wasn't there, it was about moving forward, step by step, on my own terms. And that was the decision I needed to make. I wasn't just moving on from Emily, I was deciding that I deserved a future. A future that wasn't defined by loss or betrayal, but by hope, connection, and the chance to rebuild what had been broken. As I looked at Claire, I realized that sometimes healing didn't happen in a single moment, it happened in many small, quiet decisions. Each time I chose to let go of my fears, each time I allowed myself to trust again, I was healing. I was building something new. And with Claire, maybe I wasn't just rebuilding my life. Maybe, for the first time, I was building something worth keeping. As spring rolled in, something shifted inside me. The weight of the past that had once felt so heavy was now a distant memory, something I could look at without feeling the pain of it anymore. The forgiveness I'd given, not just to Emily but to myself, had lightened my heart. I had become someone who no longer defined himself by the betrayals and regrets that had once shaped my life. Claire and I continued to grow together, and with each passing day, I found myself becoming more certain that this, what we were building, was real. I wasn't rushing, but I wasn't holding back either. It was a delicate balance of giving and receiving, of learning how to trust again, and of finding joy in the simplicity of being with someone who understood me in ways no one else had. One evening, as we took a walk through the park, the sun setting behind the trees, Claire stopped and turned to me. "Do you ever think about the future?" she asked, her voice soft. I smiled, feeling the calm of the moment settle over me. "All the time. I think about what it could look like, what I want it to be." "Yeah?" she asked, her eyes searching mine. "And what do you want?" I thought for a moment, considering the question, feeling the weight of it in the quiet space between us. "I want to keep moving forward," I said, my voice steady. "I want to build a life that's different. One where the past doesn't define me, where I'm not afraid to take chances, to love, to hope again." Claire smiled, her face lighting up. "I'm glad to hear that," she said, squeezing my hand. "Because I want that too. With you." And in that moment, I realized that this was it. The future was no longer some distant thing I was afraid to face. It was here, right in front of me, shaped by the decisions I had made and the people I had allowed into my life. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was exactly where I was supposed to be. We stood there for a while, just holding hands, watching the sun dip below the horizon. The path ahead was still uncertain, but it no longer scared me. Whatever it was, I was ready to face it, one step at a time, with Claire by my side. And that was enough.